So tensions. Tensions are those moments that your muscles tense up. You might feel that fight or flight response, that feeling in your stomach, a bit of despair. It's those moments where we're feeling really uncomfortable, moments we tend to avoid. Give a clap if you have felt a tension or uncomfortability in the last week. Now give a clap if you felt one in the last day. If you work with other humans, you likely encounter many tensions within a day. Some are little blips, just small things. Others are moments that they stay with us. They're moments that last a while. As humans, we don't like to be uncomfortable. Does anyone here like to be uncomfortable? Yeah, I didn't think I'd hear any response there. We don't like to be uncomfortable. However, it's in those moments of uncomfortability, those moments of tension, where a lot of our growth occurs. And in particular, speaking in a lens of education, we need to embrace tensions. Myself, I'm very proud to call myself an early childhood educator. And with respect of my profession, I'm going to speak through the lens as an early childhood educator today, but I do believe that this idea of embracing tensions is not only applicable to the world of ECE, but to education as a whole, in particular to the world of academia. When I say to embrace tensions, what I'm referring to is instead of us trying to skirt around the tension, trying to ignore what's an uncomfortable topic, a tough topic, what happens if instead we find meaningful ways to engage with the tension? We find meaningful ways that it is not something we're going to ignore, but it's something that we're actually going to actively seek. It's something that when we see it arise, we're going to thoughtfully look at how does this become a part of our day? What does it mean to include this? And there's a term, at tensions. And this is a term I first heard in a class with Dr. Sylvia Kind, and it's a term that's always stuck with me. This idea of being attentive to tensions. What does it mean to provide all of our attention towards the tension? So being at tensions, this is where we, in a classroom setting, we look and see what is the interest, what are these difficult conversations occurring, and what would happen if we brought our focus towards them. Not that our curriculum would pause for them, but what if our curriculum was built around it, around the possibilities of these tensions rising? And I think this is something that in education we need to do. Without the tensions, we don't have growth. It's in those moments of the unknown, those moments of uncomfortability where we learn new perspectives, new ideas, new ways of engaging. And I think when we look at it through the lens of education, tensions are critical. We have to be attentive to the tensions. And now, again, I'm an early childhood educator. When we talk about tensions, quite often they're tough topics. There are things that come up that make us as the adults uncomfortable. And quite often we say we're not going to talk about them because children are innocent. Children don't need to know about that. We don't need to bring in these big challenges into their life. Let's just skirt it to the side. It's December. We're talking about penguins. We don't need to talk about life and death. It's Penguin Month. That doesn't work though. I had a classroom where, I'm going to say they were my 4 to 5-year-olds, and children brought up some topics where one of them, the topic of death came up. One of them started talking about heaven. One of them talked about funerals, and one of them chimes in with, my grandma lives in a jar in our living room. Cremation. So as the adults in the room, that is a little bit daunting because death is a tricky subject. To the children, it's a general curiosity. To us, we're going, okay, parents are gonna have religious connections here, cultural connections. Ooh, we're getting into some dicey territory. However, if we let our own uncomfortability stop, that is us putting an end to the children's understanding. And children are current members of society. And if we view them as competent and capable beings, we need to allow opportunities to engage with tensions in meaningful ways. I previously said the idea that quite often we write off the fact that children are innocent. They have this innocence to them. We don't need to bring these tensions in. I think we need to challenge that idea of childhood innocence, though, and what does it prevent us from bringing into an educational setting? Is every child inherently born with an innocence? And when we say that we can't bring up certain topics, whether it's death, whether it's current events in our world, hard topics such as racism, sexism, when we have topics that are larger than the children themselves, we do them a disservice if we say they are too young to understand the concept. We do a disservice by privilegizing this idea of innocence and ignoring the realities of many of our children. For many, they do not have the privilege of innocence to not be aware of tough topics. And when we say we're not engaging with these tensions, this is something that's too much for the teeniest of humans, what we are saying is we are telling many of them, your reality does not matter as much as this privileged state of innocence. How does that accidentally speak to the children when we are not willing to engage with the tensions? And I think this applies into any setting with any learner. If we're not willing to engage with tough topics, what does that tell those who are facing those tough topics? What does it tell them about themselves and what we value? And this is where it gets tricky for educators, because we have to then look at how are we going to embrace these tensions? How are we going to make these a meaningful part of our space? And there's words of educator Biesta that come to my mind, where Biesta speaks to the idea of the gift of teaching. And the gift of teaching, it's not something that I or any other educator give. It's something that the learner gives. I cannot give the gift of teaching to a student. That student gifts me that gift. They gift me the ability to learn with them. In ECE, we talk about being co-learners with the children. We coexist. We're in a state of vulnerability. Tensions, I feel, are a bit easier to embrace when you're in that sense of vulnerability. And I think it's something other areas of education can learn from the world of ECE. What does it mean to put yourself in that vulnerability when embracing these tensions? And with the idea of the gift of teaching, you cannot encounter the tensions without relationship building. You cannot have these moments of trust with the children to engage with tension meaningfully unless you build those relationships. And another quote from Biesta, to learn from someone is a radically different experience from the experience of being taught by someone. And I heavily believe that if we embrace tensions, it heavily looks at the fact that we need to build these relationships and create spaces that not only acknowledge the tensions when they arise, but how do we make it clear to those in our educational settings that tensions are welcomed, they're encouraged, that we are going to build spaces that allow for radical dialogue. And with radical dialogue, I don't mean dialogue that has the intention of solving the world's problems. I do not expect that in our settings we are solving the world's problems with our 3 to 5-year-olds. However, we are giving them the tools to be empathetic, critical thinkers as they grow. We are giving them the opportunity to say, hey, our voice matters. My thoughts matter. I can change my teacher's ideas around the world. Because part of our role too as educators in embracing tensions is we all have our own perspectives. We all have bias. And whenever I say we all have bias, there's always one person who goes, I don't have any bias. Lies. We all as humans have bias. It is a human nature, and bias does not equate to necessarily hate or prejudice, but it does mean that the way that we've experienced the world will make an impact on how we engage with the tensions. And so, as the educator, if we want to create these spaces that allow for radical dialogue, allow for these meaningful conversations, we also need to reflect on ourselves. And that's a really big tension, to sit there and go, why do I feel this way? Why do I have these feelings towards these different topics? And that quite often, the tensions of your own ways of thinking can sometimes be some of the biggest knotted ones to go through. But it's a necessity when we're working in education. And when we look at embracing tensions, I want to bring into space this idea of a rhizome. Rhizomatic thinking. So a rhizome, it's a plant, it grows into all sorts of different directions, you don't really control it. Think of tensions as the seed. The tension is going to be there, but our curriculum is not going to be based around the expectation that a tension may arise. Instead, we are going to plant a seed and we're going to go with where it takes us. We're going to look at the inquiry of the children. We're going to look at what are they bringing into our space, not just what we can give to them. And when we embrace tensions, that is where we see this rhizomatic growth. That's where we all of a sudden see new discourses coming into play. We see new ways of seeing the world, new perspectives, new opportunities to better learn about ourselves, to connect with others. And again, we build critical thinking skills, empathetic, teeny tiny humans. What could we ask for that's even better than that? But this rhizomatic idea, if we embrace our tensions, we will see in our educational settings a rhizomatic growth. And this applies, again, not just to our teeniest tiny humans. Whether you're working with 3-year-olds or 33-year-olds, the idea of embracing tensions creates change in our classrooms. What does it mean for the teacher to not be the holder of knowledge, but to be coexisting and co-learning with the learners? What does it mean to give space to have difficult conversations? Whether it's judging the risk assessment of how high can a child climb on the tree, to hard conversations about how do we decolonize our pedagogical practices in a meaningful way. If we want to have these conversations, we need to be willing to embrace the tensions. And I'm sure you're tired of hearing the word tension by now, but I hope you're able to leave with that today, whether you're an educator, a student, or just existed in the world. You can use that idea of embracing tensions and what that means to you. And I'm very excited to be able to say this and it actually be a TEDx talk. Thank you for listening to my TEDx talk.